Oh, nose. 1 second. Boom. Ta-da! Hello, good morning, and welcome back to Reaper Pro Tips with me, your host, Anne, and disembodied hands, Quindy, Justin, and John. And it's a blorf morning. Woo! How are y'all? Monday. Happy Monday. Happy end o November almost. End of November Eve. Nano end Eve. NaNoWriMo end Eve. Hello, hello. Hey, Bob and Julie. Oh, dear me. Yeah, it's one of those. I don't even know how I must have shot a video. I guess I did shoot a video, so my face cam went, my video went off. Hello. Good day to you, Gravy Night. Gravy Kingpin, sorry. Not Gravy Night. I'm, like I said, sleepy Monday. It's me. Here we are. Yay, we have a Gnoll. Gnoll. It's Gnoll time. Gnoll. We're going to paint over his foot today, and we're going to get some of the rest of this fur. We're going to tackle this fur back here. And kind of show you guys a little bit, again, how to tackle fur when it's like this kind of texture. Let me get him in focus. There we go. So yeah, we're gonna play with this fur today and see what we can do to bring the rest of it up and to bring this foot more in line with the rest of our more brownish Gnoll. And I wanted to play with highlighting the pants a bit and get my other colors in. I've decided that the pants aren't terrible, and that if I get other colors blocked in, I think it's going to be just fine. So, yeah, my misreading. It's like super fast, like reading when you're on Twitch. When you're like, and I'm not really a noob on Twitch, but I mean, in some ways, I still am. But you try to read the name really fast, right? Because you want to get back to what you're doing, and so sometimes you blurble it. So blurble it is. Alrighty. So we're using our well palette, as usual. And I'm going to grab our Gnolly colors, which I, of course, have because I have a very convenient card that I did to tell me what I was doing. How I got here. Because otherwise, especially when you're using a color that you don't normally use, like in this case, I'm using the Reaper Expo Gutter Grime, which if you didn't have this, you could use Muddy Olive 9034. But because I'm using a color that I don't normally use, especially, I need to keep this card and make sure that I remember what I did. So we are going to do a Gnoll pelt. We started out, as many of you know, we started out with a base, kind of a root color, and then evolved it from there. And I could have just started with Gnoll pelt and did everything from there. But instead, we did our base color really is this russet brown and gutter grime color. Because then to get the middle color, I'm using Gnoll pelt with a brush full of that. So that's essentially, kind of a sign that this is our root color because we're using that to create our midtone. And then for our first highlight, we have Gnoll and Osirian. And then the last highlight is Osirian sand plus a brush full of the Gnoll pelt. So we will do this, or a brush full of that mix. So this is just an example of how I tend to build highlights and shadows, custom ones, so that they look different. Jedi Jared with the Prime sub, 31 months. Man, in 5 months, I'm going to have to somehow figure out how to sing a triple sub-anniversary song. Oh, Dreams, that's terrible. I'm sorry, Nomad Zeke. Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely a Monday, but it's also like, I'm trying to stay positive. Because it's like, I have so much to finish. Like, Thanksgiving derailed my my Patreon. I was so good. I was doing so well on all my Patreon stuff until Thanksgiving hit, and off the rails we go. So yeah, I've got a lot of Patreon stuff to finish in the next 2 days. But don't worry, I'll do it because I do it every month. But yeah, so patreon.com/paintingbig is my personal private Patreon with alliteration this morning for you. And yeah, we do stuff over there, really cool stuff with Master Series paint colors and videos and PDFs. Oh my. So let's see, where did I put my russet brown? Seriously, did I steal my russet brown and put it in the other room? Arg! I do this all the time. Do I have anything I could use instead? Sure. Thank you for the link, Quindy. So yes, I have a Patreon, and it is my love. I am gonna try. Shh, we're gonna use the non-Reaper paint. Shh, only because my russet brown's in the other room, and I don't want to get up. I want to get going and get this stuff in sync. So well, scrying eye with Patreon though, it's a commitment. It's a major commitment. I mean. Right. I mean, I'm allowed time off, but I need to also finish everything for my month. Sure. So it's just, it's always a thing. I always underestimate how derailed. I bet we do this too, because I used to do this even when I had a real job. You always underestimate how derailed you get by life. You're like, oh, this will be fine. I'll be able to get some work done here. No. Yeah, I know you're being supportive. I know. No, but today I've got to hit it. Like, seriously hit it. But that's what a work ethic is. So, you know, we just deal. So I'm using a... There we go. That's good. That is a good color. So what you want to end up with, no matter what you use to get there, and like I said, our usual mix is russet brown. But let me grab... Where's my giant base? There's my giant base. The white palette tends to bleach out colors, but if we put the giant base next to it, you can see the actual color. So you want this kind of really dark olive. And almost any dark brown will get you there. Some, if they're more black, they're going to get you, a little bit more grayed out color. I usually use, like I said, Master Series Russet Brown, which is equivalent to Burnt Umber. So what I did is I actually used a tube paint Burnt Umber right there to create the same mix. Which just shows you that the Master Series Burnt Umber is actually, Master Series Russet Brown actually is a real equivalent for Burnt Umber in Artist Tube. I'm going to be doing a thing for my Patreon soon, doing tube paint equivalents in Master Series. So if you do have kind of an art background, or you always have been interested in artist colors, artist tube paint colors, and wondered, are there equivalents in hobby paints? I'm going to be doing an equivalency sheet for that soon. Probably for this coming month. I might do it. I haven't decided if it's going to be free or just for all patrons. Might just be for all patrons. You can be supportive if you want. I just can't let myself down. I have to keep moving. Oh yeah, sure. No problem, Polyfusion. Yeah, they're worth it, I find. Like, I'm going to cry when mine dies. I have to buy a new one. Although I'm kind of glad that it didn't, it was new enough that at least it didn't die in the middle of the pandemic, because everybody was using them during the middle of COVID lockdowns, because teachers, they're mostly used by teachers, and when teachers all had to teach from home, they all went out and bought these, and so the price doubled online, which was insane. So... Probably I should just buy a backup. I should just, set aside a budget in my Patreon money and buy a backup one. Because I can't survive without it, so it makes sense to have a backup in case of emergency. There we go. So I've got that nice dark olive now. Yeah, that's exactly the right song today, Iffy. All right, so now we've got Gnoll Pelt plus a brush full of our dark olive. And when I do that, when I say, and this is why it's good to get yourself in kind of a, so that you do things kind of like standard. Like when I start out with a color, I always put 4 drops in. Always start with 4 drops in my case. And so when I have a note that says Gnoll Pelt plus a brush full of this previous color, I know that it's 4 drops of Gnoll Pelt, because that's just what I would do. So getting yourself into these little habits where you always start out with a particular quantity of paint, especially easy to do when you're dealing with dropper bottles. So that way you know, you're like, yeah, if I put this down, then it just means 4 drops plus a brush full. It means you can keep more abbreviated notes. You're wasting less time writing down what you're doing and more time getting to the painting. No, the giant base is here so that you can see color realistically against the palette. Because you see here how everything darkens down, Pendrake. I keep giant base around because then when I move this in, now you can see the actual color. When I look up at my screen here, the color I see on my computer screen is exactly the color I'm seeing in person. So that's why I keep giant base around. Giant base is always here for that reason, because otherwise you can see it as the white base tends to bleach out. It's just the way the color corrects on the camera. So giant base is purely there for that. No, I would never, ever, ever use a base that large for Gnoll. Ever. So there's the color that it makes. Now we're filling up more of the white space. So now the more of the white space you fill up with another color, the more you're going to see this natural color. And be able to, this is showing up reasonably well. But again, if we put this here, now you can see it exactly the way I see it. So you would never put Gnoll or any other 28 millimeter onto one of these giant, is it a 40 mil? It's it might be a 50 mil. It's a big platter. Yeah, it helps the color balance. That's why I keep pie plate base around. But you would never do this because this base is actually taller than Gnoll. And when you are doing base sizing, try never to use a base that is more than half the height of the figure once the figure is based up. So if you're going to mount the figure on a rock, you actually get a little bit more base that you can add without totally overwhelming the figure. But if you put this figure on this base, it's just going to be buried. Like the rest of this space is going to be dead space. It's going to be really boring, and you're suddenly going to have all this space you have to fill with stuff. This base would be okay for probably 2 figures, because then if you stack those 2 figures on top of each other, you would have, you'd essentially have half the height. But it's kind of a guideline that just I developed. It's nothing I think that's actually like been defined in miniature painting like officially or anything. Not that anything ever is. But in my, like when I was making big bases for models for competition or for commissions, I found that if I made the base no wider than like half the height of the figure or maybe a little extra, then it would look good. The composition would look good. In fact, his base is about, because his stance is wide, his base is about half the height of him. And so he's centered nicely on this base. It's good. It's more narrow from the side, and that's why you could afford to drop him into a slightly larger base, which sadly I don't have right here. But yeah, you could drop him onto a round base, and you could putty around to fill it in with more boards and whatever you wanted to do. But people make this mistake all the time. They use a big base and then they scenic it out with just grass and rocks and whatever. But the real question is, are you telling a story here? Like, does the base accomplish anything? Is it add to the Gnoll in some way? Does it suggest a story? If it does, maybe you can get away with it. But if it doesn't, then you're essentially you're causing yourself extra work, and it's actually going to hurt your model as far as how it looks. No, it wouldn't work, Pendrake. It's not going to work. It's dead space. It will make the model boring. You may think it will work, but it won't work. You want to tell your story, your model's story, in as small a space as you could possibly get away with. Now, like I said, if you put him on a raft and the raft was slightly smaller than this, and say you had monsters attacking the edge of the raft, then you've got a diorama. Then this is a perfect size. But the minute you aren't using this extra space for anything other than scenery, it's space that needs to go. It's space that will cause your composition to be much more boring and static. Because the bigger your horizontal space, vertical is exciting visually to us as humans. It's more interesting. Flat and featureless and horizontal is not exciting. It's just a bunch of kind of boring stuff, right? So you have to make it exciting somehow to justify using this space. And how you make it exciting is up to you, and there's various ways you could do it. But essentially, it's if you don't have a clear concept in mind and you're not introducing a really dynamic factor, if he's just on a raft in water, you could do that smaller. And this is probably the biggest mistake I see in dioramas. Any diorama I'm showed by anyone who isn't really into the composition, who doesn't have a good grasp of composition, is the base is way too big. You could tell the story. Sometimes a couple of the dioramas at ReaperCon, I could have told the same story more effectively in 1/5 the space. Yeah, it almost is, Jabberwock, and that's probably why it works. All right, I need another color. I need Gnoll and Osirian Sand, which I keep meaning to get online and buy another 2 bottles of because I use it so much. Osirian Sand, the awesome kind of pale yellowy color. It's just a great highlight. So again, I'm going to start with 4 drops, and since it's a 1-to-1 ratio, I'm going to go 2 of the Osirian Sand and 2 of the Gnoll pelts. But yes, since you like exactitudes and numbers and like things like that, Pendrake, I figured that you would appreciate that ratio just because it will help make more effective scenic bases. Like, just make sure that it's not much more than half, as far as its width, not much more than half with that. Like, even with this, like, I could maybe even, on a very small base, if I just extended the base out to either side to be the same width as it is the length, or the length as it is the width, I could probably suggest that scenario that you just laid out with the raft. And just have the boards kind of fading off, and then on the front have a really ragged edge to the boards with water, and, you know, then you'd suggest something of the sort. Right? But I could do it in a much smaller space, which saves me work, saves me time, and makes it look better. Yeah, I stopped using, like, these days it's either Osirian Sand or pure white for me, but I used to use linen white for everything. Like, back when I was first starting to compete, linen white was the holy grail color for everybody. I think everybody was using it in the USA for highlighting. And there's nothing wrong with it. Like, going continuously to an off-white instead of a pure white, it's got 2 results. Pure white packs a lot more of a pigment punch. It's going to wash out the color a lot faster because it's so strong and it's so heavily pigmented. But the linen white doesn't quite have as much punch to it because mostly a pure pigment color is going to have a lot of punch to it in Master Series. And so linen white will give you a lot softer effect. It won't wash out your colors as fast, which a lot of people like. And it's a little bit of an off-white, so it's not quite as harsh. It'll soften. It'll just give a little softening to whatever color you put it in, unless you're adding, even if you're adding it to yellow or orange, it'll still do that. Because it's got some different pigments in it. It's got some yellows, but it's also got a little bit of brown in it. So it will mute out. It'll mute out your colors. And it works pretty well. That's why a lot of people use it for skin tone highlighting. They don't want a really dramatic shift, and they want that softening. So off-whites, I think I did a little thing on off-whites at one point about how they were useful and why and which ones. Leather white is very different, though. Leather white is gray, and that you usually do not want. In skin tones especially. It will deaden your skin color. So I would avoid leather white for skin unless you're doing like orcs, something with a grayish undertone, orcs or trolls. Linen white, a lot more useful for human skin tones. Yeah, I think that you could, linen is, you can also use bleached linen as your highlight there. When you're trying to do linen, just use a warmish undertone to it, like a cream or cream brown, to get that look of more raw linen. But Osirian Sand also makes a good linen-y highlight color, because the yellow kind of washes out a little bit when you highlight with it. So, colors we've got right now. Now, what I do want to do, I think, is add just a tiny bit of this brown to the highlight. Did I even get a little bit of that? There. Like, I'm just getting the there we go. I'm just getting the very tip of my brush. And then I'm going to get a nice big fat brush full of this and put it into this. So this is going to be my final highlight. There we go. So now we have not a pentad, but a quadrad to paint Gnoll. And if I had to guess, I've been doing a lot of stuff with pentads, and it's a very useful idea to experiment with when you're starting painting and trying to figure out your highlights and shadows. But with me, I'd say if I'm painting for the gaming table or for like gallery, but not competition level, I would say this is like kind of what I do. I've got a midtone, I've got a shadow, and I've got 2 highlights. Now, the number of layers are going to vary. Like, I may take these 4 colors and actually put 6 or 7 layers because some of them are going to be thinner and I'm going to do more than 1 layer with the color. Probably actually going to do more than 1 layer with the base coat, weirdly. Yeah. Yeah, bleached linen has a little bit more of a punch of white pigment in it, so it also isn't as soft as the linen white. But I wanted another strong white, but that wasn't a pure white, so that's why bleached linen became a thing. All of these things have uses, and sometimes the uses are splitting hairs, but sometimes that's just what you want. You want this color that does this thing that isn't that. And that's how you get 500 colors in Master Series paint. All right. So I found my big brush that I wanted to use on my stream on Saturday. I totally found my gigantic brush, and it was way too late because I already started it. It was very annoying. It was hiding in the back of my drawer like it had fled, like it didn't want to be used. It was very sad. Alrighty. Now let's knoll out. We've got our colors. We're going to knoll out. We're going to finish the fur today. We're going to repaint his paw. This is the first thing to do. Because now I'm annoyed with the paw. It's throwing off how I'm assessing. Now it's to the point where this color is throwing off how easily I can assess whether the indigo is working. So let us paint over that paw. Yeah, I think that's okay thinness. I'm going to have to redo a bunch. So we started out with a color that was very close. But what we did was we brought a lot of our shadow tone into it. A lot of our shadow tone into it. And we started out a lot darker. So I'm going to kind of wet blend a little bit. Taking our brown and bringing it into this green to darken down our paw. There we go. That's about what I want. And I'm going to darken. Now we're getting closer. We still need more shadow in the brown, from the brown. And I'm going to come back here and totally paint the back of the paw in with this shadow. Originally, we did these paws differently to show the difference between starting with kind of a middle-of-the-road color and starting with a dark color, and how it influences, even if you use the same colors to shade and highlight, how dramatically it can influence the way your colors come up. So those 2 paws were painted with the same colors. They were just starting at a different level of light or dark. So I'm bringing in more of the shadow color to darken that down. Still not quite as brown as I got back here, but I also need to let it dry because that's going to affect it. Yeah, but everybody, I mean, Jabberwock, everybody has got, or Shadow Raven, everybody's got different colors that we gravitate toward. And over time, it'll change. Like, you'll get kind of sick of your color that you always turn to, and you'll start looking for something else, and you'll discover something that really is exciting, and you'll run with it, right? It's just the way we are as painters. We're like squirrel. I'm actually going to mix up some brown liner to do that scar. He's got some slashes there. I want to darken down that area. So let me get some brown liner mixed in here. We're going to make a separate puddle for that. So then technically we are working with a pentad at that point. We're working with, there's our brown liner, which I just dropped into the area where I had my burnt umber before. So brown liner then becomes our darkest shadow, which is a near black. And then we've got our, there we go. Now we can see it a little better. There we are. So near black, very dark brown. Then our brownish green, olivey color. And then that, and then those guys. So we now have a pentad. But yeah, linen white, definitely very versatile color. There's a reason we all used it for eons and eons. And a lot of people still reach for it regularly. I just find that I've gone away from it a little bit. I think Osirian sand is my stand-in for bleached linen now. Or for linen white. But it's always interesting to see. He has a lot of slashes and scars down on his leg. Somebody tried to take his kneecap off. Obviously, he was attacked by a very short person. That's an old Pro Paint. The 8000 series, that would have been before my time. I wonder if it's even still good. But yeah, that's an old Pro Paint. There we go. Yes. I think the 1.9 was the second version we did. 8009, I think, is the first version in the pot. And I think the 19,000s were versions in the bottle. Whether the pot is still good is really questionable. I think in normal packaging, it would probably not still be good. It may look fine from outside, but when you open it, I would be shocked if it was good. Pots are just not as good at preserving paint over time. Unless you store them. Oh, yeah. Yeah, it was a medium green, like a little bit opaque. Little cool. I probably think that maybe a leaf green or grass green would be your best sub for that color. 9014. I'm going to take my shadow, my dark olivey color now, and kind of shade in between the toes. So we're darkening down that foot. Now it's very close. Now we can see that it's the same color down here as it is up here. Where we haven't highlighted yet, and these two will end up matching. Oh, it's not going to be even cottage cheese. Cottage cheese is usually what you get when it freezes, but when it's just been sitting in a package for 15 years, it's just going to be a plug. Like, it's become a solid plug of latex at that point, or whatever resin was used. Just water. I mean, if it's thick, just water. I usually use hot water. It doesn't really do anything except make it integrate faster. And it's probably really not even that much of a fast. It's just my personal feeling. But just water. You shouldn't need to use medium. When you add a medium to a paint, it will affect the paint. It may affect it just a tiny increment, so you don't really even notice, but it will affect, usually the thing it will affect is adhesion, how well the paint sticks to the model. But it may also affect separation, and it depends on the medium. Nowadays, most mediums work together with most paints because everything is getting kind of standardized. Nobody's using anything really weird except Tamiya. All right, so now I'm going to go back with my Gnoll color and kind of highlight over areas where I feel like I went over too much with the brown, like his little toes, little tips of his toes. I do want a little bit of a dark shadow there at the end so that the claws will stand out when I redo them. So I'm going to use my mid-tone here. Just kind of reblock this in. I didn't thin it a lot, so it's actually pretty good still. I'm going to thin down this highlight color. Whenever you've got something, you've added anything with white in it, you know you're going to get a big difference when you put it on. Yeah, I mean, if you shake it and, maybe you add a little water to it here and there when it thickens up, you can keep paint going for a long time. But if it was at a store sitting on a rack for 15 years, which frankly does happen in some of those old game stores, then it's probably not good. Because it hasn't been shaken, it hasn't been stored correctly. With paint pots, store them upside down when you can. If you're planning not to touch them for a long time, if you know that you're probably going to forget to take them out and shake them, store them upside down. Because then the fluid creates an additional seal around the edge of that bottle cap. But with dropper bottles, you want to do the opposite. You never want to store them upside down because then if paint does solidify or latex out, it's going to drop and cover up the aperture that you squeeze your paint through. So it's just going to mean clogged bottles. On the side is fine. And upright is fine. There we go. Get that paw going on. This one's still a little bit more... a little bit less green. I think I had a little more brown in it. I think I'm going to do a glaze with my Gnoll pelt and bring it a little bit closer to the other. My color up top's fine. I just think my initial mix over there was probably more veering toward the brown. So I'm going to create a glaze of the green. I'm going to drop a lot of water into it. You know, I really like the fur, but the face was fun to do. But I honestly, I don't know if I have a favorite part because the thing is, Green Oaks is this is such a simple model. So it's not like you've got like a really complicated model to choose. But as far as it goes, it was fun to do his face. Although I haven't finished his eyes out yet. The pants were probably, you know, if I had to choose something that I had the most fun on so far, it's probably pants. Just because stripy pants are always really fun to do. But that was me doing freehand. It wasn't like an aspect of the sculpt. So if I had to pick an aspect of the sculpt, I like his face. All right, so I've got a glaze that's very green. I'm going to essentially paint it over this to bring these two guys more in line with each other. I think I got a little bit more brown and a little less green. I think I used maybe straight up russet brown to shade this guy over here. It was a while ago, so that happens. You just gotta kind of adjust a little bit. Usually a glaze will be good enough. And I don't really want his paw to have russet brown shading because I used russet brown for the boards. So it's probably better to take it away from the brown and toward the green, actually. And we are doing the green because Gnolls originally were supposed to be greenish brown in pelt. So just like the ogre that we're painting, we're using original, like kind of first edition monster color ideas just to shake it up a bit. There, it's a little bit better. Yeah, now those paws look really close. That's what we're working on. We actually haven't started painting her. I primed her over the weekend. We're actually going to be painting the Angelica bust on this stream, Green Oaks. She is, let's see, today, Monday, Tuesday. Tomorrow is Ogre Day. Then it's Tiefling Day. And then, so Thursday. Thursday will be our first painting day on her. Wherein we choose colors. This is the first time we'll have been able to actually paint a bust on the show. So it'll be interesting. She has a lot of different textures. So I'm just highlighting the foot here. I'm also going to bring in a little bit more shadow over here, just like the other side. Between the toes. Still a little bit more brown on the other side. That's all right, though. But yeah, so we'll go probably pretty, and we'll start out with very simple process, like, you know, just simple concepts on that bust, but we'll probably take it up pretty high. We'll see. We'll see how it goes. She is a little bit more of a cartoony sculpt, so doing a very realistic paint job on her isn't gonna fly with the way she's been sculpted. But we can, you know, do a good solid paint on her from my perspective. We'll definitely talk about texture and stuff at at bust scale, which we haven't been able to do with any other model that we've done. So that'll be nice. Yeah, I think she's a good way for people who have been looking to get into busts to do so. Because she is sculpted more like a 28 in a lot of ways. But she gives you the opportunity to experiment with some stuff that it's really hard to do on smaller models. I'm doing a series on my Patreon right now about what kind of texture you can do at 28 millimeter. It's very different. It's very different to paint a bust. There we go. Now we got it. Now our Gnolly's feet are in more in alignment. Excellent. A little bit more of a highlight over here, I think. But yeah, I actually like most of the models we're working on right now. Like, I went through a phase where we were working on stuff that I was just like, nah. And, you know, it gets that way, right? Like, everybody kind of, like, is excited about projects at the beginning, and then as they go on, it's just like, meh. And that's how things get put on the shelf of no longer loved. But right now, I really like, I think, all of the projects. Like, maybe Darius I'm so on, but as he comes together more, I think I'll like him better. Sometimes we finish a model on the stream, and I'm really psyched about it. Like, that I've been really excited about it from start to finish. I really like the ogre, actually. He's turning out really well. I like it when we do dramatic lighting on pieces, because I feel like with the monsters especially, you can do it, and it looks really good. Now I'm just going over and highlighting right under these little scars, which is going to bring them out and make them look like they're carved into his leg more. But yeah, this is a fun little model. The nice thing about him is that he is so simple. But you can still do a good job on him. Like, he still has enough detail that you can, you know, make his fur really cool, and you can, you know, kind of, we haven't even done the weathering on the lower parts of his ripped up pants yet. But, you know, you can do patterns in freehand. You can do, you know, NMM or metallics, whatever you want to do on the blades and stuff. Because his metallic parts, except for his buckles, are pretty clear cut. They're big, so metallics work better on him than they might on a different model. So I think, in fact, we're going to do metallics on him. The buckles will be the part that will be challenging to make read in metallic because they are so small. So usually that's why I don't go for metallics on 28 millimeter. But because his weapons are big and clunky, I decided we could do it. I'm just going to use liner to paint around his little claws on his feet. Because then when I paint them over in Osirian sand, they will stand out like they did over here. And you don't really care if you get a little bit on the base or on his paws, because we've already kind of added a shadow there since he's standing here. There'd be a shadow. You can see that this may look natural, but I actually did paint this shadow in right here. So the fact that it does look natural is a testament to the fact that it actually works. Putting a shadow under your models actually is a huge part of suggesting that trying to sell any lighting you might be able to do. Like, if you're doing a lighting effect, pay attention to where the shadow will be, because if you put that information on the base, then your illusion will be more successful. I need just some plain up Osirian sand now. Ah. Boop, boop, boop. And the yellow color of the Osirian sand isn't really going to even show up when I use it for his little claws like this. It'll just be another off-white because it's such a small area that Osirian sand, even though it is yellow, it's just going to look pale. Yeah, I think my fungal queen's going to go to Ron. Probably going to go live at Reaper. Alrighty. Little pause. There we go. And if I feel like the other claws got a little bit brighter, and just do a little bit of a touch up over here. Make them stand out. There we go. Nice bright claws. Since they're so tiny, making them bright isn't bad because it makes them stand out. All right, let's figure out what we're gonna do. Now he's hunkered over, so his chest would be a lot in shadow. So let's use our darks more than our lights. If something is in shadow, if an area is in shadow, it will still have its own highlights and shadows. And especially if the rest of the model's in bright light, you'll be able to see details in the shadows, just like you can outdoors when you go on a hike and you're looking at, you know, the shadow side of a rock or a cliff or whatever. You can still see details. But mostly, everything's going to be kind of darker. So using your shadow colors more than your highlight colors, or even instead of your highlight colors, is a good tactic. So I'm going to come in with brown liner and actually shade pretty dramatically here underneath his pecs, down into the rib cage and ab area. I'm going to just kind of block in some heavy shadow. Because again, remember, if we paint an area dark, it will stay dark. It will appear darker than the other areas where we may have started with a midtone. Probably a heavy shadow under the belt here. So see how putting in that hard shadow, it's not natural looking yet, but it at least does define all of those different areas. Likewise, we can block in the underside of the arm really dark, and the underside of this bicep can go very dark as well on the other side. Putting in a harsh shadow. Makes it look more comic book to do this. It's the kind of shading you would see in a comic book. Kind of the interesting thing about comic book art is that it almost operates in reverse, inversion to mini painting as we normally do it, where a lot of texture is suggested with shadow instead of highlight. So a lot of times the highlights will fall to the colorist, and they will, in modern comic books, if there's a shiny surface, definitely that's where the highlights are going to suggest a texture. But otherwise, a lot of information is how the shadows are done. It gives you a lot of visual information. So painting comic book style is a different beast for that reason, in my opinion. I've been studying that a lot lately because I kind of want to try to do it on a bust I have. Yeah, and I'm going to highlight just a little because there would be some bounce light here. But I won't touch most of my top highlight colors. I'll just go up to the midtone, likely. Maybe a little bit higher than the midtone. But yeah, I mean, this guy stands out pretty well on the tabletop. For tabletop 28, it's not just about, it's about using a very dark shadow, but it's also about highlighting. I think for 28s, highlighting makes almost more of a difference because that's where a lot of people skimp for 28s for tabletop. They'll do a base coat and a wash to get their dark shadows, but then they won't do much of a highlight. And so the model won't do as well on tabletop. That's why the Games Workshop stuff you see has all the line highlights, because even if it's just a line, it'll make everything stand out on the tabletop better. So learning to do fast, like edge highlighting, even on organic surfaces, is a pretty good tactic if you're doing a lot of stuff for tabletop. Pardon me. Darken down this area here. So now the abs are very clear. I am going to darken down the area under the neck a little bit as well. And here. Underneath the fur. And under this bicep, I do want a big heavy shadow. There. Heavy. Good. When I say heavy shadow, it's actually like a double meaning, because shadows do add the effect of weightiness. Like they give you the feel of solidity and weight. When you do a heavy dark shadow, you are sending the message visually that this is a very solid object. Which is why you will often see much more ethereal, subtle shadows on something that's very like thin or pale or wispy, like, you know, a female elf figure. You probably wouldn't go for a big, weighty, really dark shadow. But on something like this or a barbarian, it would be more suitable. So you're emphasizing that at that point. All right, so let's take our greenish color. I need to throw a little bit more water in it. This is our Gnoll pelt plus a little bit of our shadow that I'm going to be working with. It's probably going to be the highest highlight on these abs. And we're just going to emphasize some of this so that those areas stand out and still have a highlight, just not as much of one. There. Not too bad. That's pretty good. All right. I'm going to use that also on this fur under his neck. And I might go up one more highlight on that fur just because I feel like there'd be light coming in from the side here. It's all painted dark right now, so it's hard to see that. There we go. Now we can see that fur a little bit better, bringing out those details. And I can sneak in a little bit of a higher highlight if I do it very subtly. That's pretty good. And again, down here, we're leaving it a little darker as it goes. It's got to be brighter on top of the arm, on top of the shoulder, darker down there if you're going to carry this effect. But we did paint the belt pretty bright. We can also drop the belt. So we've got two conflicting lighting styles here. Although I did keep the belt a little darker here. I think maybe if I do the shoulder up here, it'll be more evident where I'm going. I also feel like I want just a little bit of highlight on the pectoral there. Just maybe at the outer edge. And maybe a little bit on this side. Because there's light technically that could fall there and light that up, but not back there under the arm. It's just a little bit of suggestion back there, detail. There we are. It's not appropriate for something like this, green oaks, because the fur is very dull here. This is very dull fur. It's kind of matted. He's kind of a filthy Gnoll pirate. You do reflected light on 28s if you have a metallic or a non-metallic metal surface. So, for example, if his sword was down here, crossed over his body, then on the back side of it, it would be appropriate to do reflected color. Or if his fur was white and shiny and pristine, if you were doing something that had like a color that would do that. But like, you would never do it on anything that's this color or this surface. Like, you have to think about the surface. Is the surface actually reflective? Like with fur, normally not too much unless it's like a very smooth fur and it's a color that would naturally reflect, like, or the light is very strong. So, like, if I had a glowing object here, you might see the glow on the fur, but normal reflective color, not so much here. And if the blue did bounce onto the fur, it would probably only make it gray. Like, you always have to think about the color and how it's going to interact with the color you're going onto. Like, David, my fiance, is a total, like, stickler for this because he hates how people do reflected light and they do it wrong all the time. It's always going to be affected by what it's bouncing onto. So, like, if white is very reflective, so if he had white fur, and it's also really neutral, right? So blue would very easily be picked up by white fur. So you might be able to do that, maybe. But again, it with a dull surface, because fur, unless fur is really sleek, like horses, really smooth, it scatters light. It doesn't effectively reflect it very well. And even like in times where, like when you're outside and there's a blue sky and you don't have sun directly on you, all your shadows tend to turn a bit blue, but it'll read as gray on skin because blue plus orange equals gray. But I wouldn't do it even if this was a white, like if it was a white surface, I still wouldn't do it. You're doing 28 millimeter. Any reflected light, if you were looking at this model, if this was a human-sized model, it would have to be like, 100 feet away to be this size. And if it was 100 feet away, you wouldn't notice any reflected light. There's just no way. Unless you're in full suit of armor out under the sun, then you're going to notice blue sky reflections in that armor because it's everywhere, right? It's a big surface. But anything that's subtle, you're not going to notice at this scale if you're worried. Like, it's going to look weird. If you did a reflected color here, it would be telling us that the pants were glowing. Like, that's the visual information you'd be giving the viewer. Even though you're not trying for that, it's still that's the way it's going to look. So, because it's not quite right for the scale. I mention him because he's very good at lighting. And I don't mention him nearly as often as I used to, Shadow Raven. At least I'm calling him a fiance instead of a boyfriend now. Like, that took forever. But yeah, Reaper John always said we needed a counter for a bingo card for when I mentioned David. That's fine. I can not mention him and not give you guys the information. My thing is, though, and take note, actually, of this, when anybody in miniatures teaches you something that is valuable, do not present it as your own idea. Always give cred. Your teachers will thank you. So when I mention David, it's essentially to give him cred because I didn't come up with this on my own. It's something I learned from him. And I always try to give credit to my previous teachers over the years as well. If somebody taught me something useful, like that's why you hear me mention Rhonda, actually more than David even on this show, is because Rhonda's blog is very useful and has really useful concepts and often teaches me to think about something in different ways. So yeah, so when I mention somebody on here, it's because I want to give them credit for teaching me that I didn't come up with all this stuff on my own. If I did come up with something like it's my own thought, I'm absolutely going to just, present it. But I was taught back in the day that it's always a good idea to kind of pass the love on to your teacher, which is why when I talk about Sergio's class or Kirill's class, that's me essentially letting you know I didn't just come up with this stuff out of the blue. Those guys came up with it first and they were cool enough to teach me. So it's a cred thing. It's giving cred. Giving cred is always, always, always important. Like we learn from everybody else who came before us that developed all these awesome concepts and techniques. And when I can, I like to pass the love on because they were cool enough to teach me. And they didn't have to, right? There's so many great mini painters who don't teach. Whether because that's just not something they're drawn to, or because they feel it will devalue their information that they're otherwise, selling elseways, or they just don't have a good forum for it. But always appreciate the people who teach. And I don't say that because I'm one of them. I am not nearly the only person. There are so many good teachers out there. But that's why I mention David and Rhonda and Sergio and Kirill a lot, because I feel like these are the people who I have learned a lot from over the years. It's definitely influenced the way I tackle painting. Yeah, teaching is definitely a skill. I mean, I've had to become, I strive to become a better teacher because I enjoy teaching. You only bring it up because he and I have a relationship, though. I mentioned Rhonda, too, and you never mentioned that, Shadow Raven. You just like to dig me about my guy. That's all. You can do that. That's fine. The thing is that David doesn't do streaming, so he's not out here all the time to answer you guys' questions. So I have to sub him in by mentioning him every once in a while. Because he would totally sit here and lecture you on this reflected color question. You get him going on it sometime. Yes. It's not really velvet. It's just kind of dull cloth, and it's going to be faded out Zen. But, yeah, there's a lot of people who don't teach well. Well, okay, so there's two things about that, Turgeon. One, a really organic painter isn't really going to be able to tell you exactly what they just did because they just reached for colors and put them on. They're just not, they don't break it down. It takes a brain. When you're an artist and you're trying to teach, you have to be able to break down what you're doing and to quantify it and to put it in an order that other people will understand. That is difficult. Never underestimate how difficult that is. And you've got to be a good communicator and comfortable with communicating to people, right? In the format where you are the instructor and they are not. And there are plenty of people who aren't comfortable doing that, who aren't great, who are great painters, but not great teachers, simply because they're not personally comfortable in that role, or they're just not very comfortable being up in front of people, which a lot of us, I think, can identify with, right? Oh, yeah. Oh, now I have to do it. Now I have to be like, Rhonda, I'm going to start talking about you like you're the most amazing person in the world. That would be funny. And Rhonda would be like, what the hell? What's with Anne? All right. I'm just freshening up my colors. I need to add a little bit more water, keep them going. We are an hour in, and it's been pretty dry here, so my colors are all like setting up. Hey, it should be pretty cool that I'm still this like excited about like David after living together for how many years now? Since the pandemic. I guess in April it'll be 2 years. It's really a long time if you think about it. All right, so I just wanted to touch up that foot. Yup. Light of my life, love of my soul. Yep. But he's not here to like rail at you guys about OSL, so I have to do it. So bringing in just a little bit of kind of a mid-tone mixed with a little bit of highlight for the fur on the back of the paws here. We are still a little greener on this side than that side, and that is because we started out a little greener. So even now, even after layers of paint, we're still impacted by that initial greener foot. But we can continue to work on it. A brown glaze, honestly, if I had my regular russet brown, a brown glaze would fix it. Yeah, I've had enough failed relationships over the years to get very excited about a very good relationship. All right, so bringing some browns in here again to kind of tone down that area. Probably we'll just hit this with a glaze of russet brown next time we work on him, when I actually will have russet brown in front of me, one hopes. And that'll totally fix having a little bit more of a green hue back here than we do right now. So that fixed a lot of it. But yeah, when you're thinking reflected light, always ask yourself, why exactly is this light reflecting? Like, it would reflect off of a shiny surface, or it would reflect off of a very reflective surface like white. White is very, just generally as a color, is very reflective. But when you're dealing with black, the only time you're going to get that reflected light is really when something is glowing. Black is not a very reflective color, especially a matte black. So like these pants where they've got the black stripes, especially once we dull them down and weather them out at the ends so that they're obviously like kind of old and dirty. Just kind of taking my liner and introducing some more texture, bringing out some of the texture in the fur here. That way I don't need to bring up a lot of highlights back here. I can concentrate more on the shadows to bring out detail. Bye, Shadow Raven. Alrighty. So yeah, still a little brown on this side, but we're fine. I guess I could glaze with the umber, but I don't know that I want to do that. I think I'll just keep going. So let's get the fur on this shoulder up to snuff here. And on the back. So I'm using just a little bit of paint on my brush, and I'm kind of stippling the fur, except in little dashes instead of dots. And I'm trying to go in the same direction as the fur is sculpted. So it's like, yeah, you could dry brush this, but you'd leave a lot of texture, and dry brushing something that's such a small area would be very difficult without impacting everything else around it. So just taking a lot of the paint off your brush, not nearly as much as you would with dry brushing, but still enough so that you can control it. And just kind of like dabbing it over the surface kind of gives you that same effect. You pick up color on the edges of things that are sticking out, and it doesn't generally go into the cracks up here. You can see how that's turning out. When you get to a certain point where you really don't have a lot of paint on your brush, you can do some targeted, like almost dry brushing. This isn't dry, but it's definitely getting to where the paint isn't coming off it isn't coming off smoothly anymore, so you can almost dry brush with it. You don't want to really abuse your brushes, so the minute it really starts to dry out is when you rinse your brush. You don't want paint to dry in your good brushes, and it's just not worth it. Reload and come back and just kind of gently hit as much detail as you can. Phew. All right. Mondays are always such a full day. So again, trying to highlight more on the upper side of the arm here, and I'll be bringing up the highlights even more because this is an area that's going to get a lot of light. And I'll probably work a bit more with the fur as well up on top to bring it up a little lighter. And on these flat areas, I am still doing kind of a fur brush stroke, just like I did over here, to bring out some fur texture. I'm mostly going to do that with my top highlights, but I can start the work a little bit with my midtone. There we are. So just really just dashes. Just to bring up all that fur. And then we'll start adding some real detail. With our next highlight, once we've got all this blocked in. I want to get the back of his hand. Oh, got a little bit. Didn't quite get a lot of a solid base coat on this part. So I'm going to bring in oof, Karenico, oof. Sorry about that. Bring in my liner again to kind of block in some dark shadow under this. Also make sure that this is reading correctly. I'm going to adjust my seat here. Yes, hoping my Monday goes a little bit better. Just need to stay focused and get some things done today. It's rough just because NaNoWriMo has been like, this is like the end of Nano, so I've been doing an extra, writing 1,700 words a day every day for the last month, and I could use a little bit of a break. I'm going to keep writing after Nano's done, but I'm going to probably lower the amount of words I require myself to do a day. Because it definitely is a strain to keep it up every day for a month. It's a lot of writing when you've got a lot of other stuff to do in your life. There we go. Oh, yeah. Reaper Challenge League. Let's get a plug for the Reaper Challenge League. Do we have a plug for the Reaper Challenge League, Quindy? Exclamation point. RCL, isn't it? If you are looking to get more models done and have a kind of soft commitment device to help you get more done, you could try the Reaper Challenge League, which has fun challenges that you can do by yourself or with a team or whatever. There it is. Yay, Reaper Challenge League. All right, so let's get up here, and this is where I'm going to start to bring out more texture. I'm going to start just by using this pale highlight to get some of the tips and edges of these little bits of fur. Just the edges to make them kind of stand out as different clumps of fur. When you get to an area like the arm where you want to introduce some texture, you can do it. You'll want to do it quite fine texture. Little tiny brush strokes to suggest fur. And there isn't a lot. Like, a little goes a long way on this. You just kind of want to soften the surface and suggest a bit. So it's not just reading as green skin. And if you get kind of clumpy or messed up, just grab your shadow color and break it up a little bit. With little lines. Same direction. And you know what direction the fur is growing because you can see the fur growing in that direction here on the elbow. So just follow the direction that you see already sculpted on the model. Oh, wow. That sounds like a big mess, Christodoma. All right, let's get some of these. I'm only using my first highlight color and not my second for this fur yet, but the fur that's up on top of stuff, on the shoulders and stuff, will get that final highlight. But stuff that's up and down, like just kind of on the back here, that's kind of vertical to the light source, probably will only get this secondary highlight. It won't go all the way up. And I will leave a little bit of a shadow between the mane here and the shorter fur on the skin. It's because these clumps are kind of extending out over the skin, so you kind of want a shadow along them. So more light up here on the parts of the mane that are going to catch it, and the shoulder here, and on the arm up there as well. We're going to go a little heavier. We're just going to add a little more water though, because I don't want any clumpiness. I want a real fine effect, even if I have to build it up over a couple of layers. That may have gone a little far. The nice thing about paint mixes is that if you over thin the color here, you know you can reconstitute it by just mixing this and this. So putting a brush full of this thicker color and this thicker color will help thicken this up if you add just a little bit too much water to it. The other thing is I probably need to switch to a smaller brush at this point if I find that I've got too much going on. So we can go to tiny brush, which is the Triple Aught Da Vinci. Although I do have a brand new Winsor Newton Series 7 that I just bought. I keep buying them. I keep like going, we'll give you another chance, Winsor Newton. And then they betray me, and I feel so sad. But we're not whipping out. Maybe we'll get that one out tomorrow for the ogre and see if it's gonna behave. The nice thing about the Winsor Newton Series 7 is you can find it a lot of places. Like you can get them on Amazon. Yeah, I think this is the right paint consistency here. I can get a little texture, but not too much. But yeah, we went to an art store this weekend. I was so excited. Actually going to a real in-person art store. Yeah, it helps if you just get in your Zen zone. I mean, with your name. Not just with bacon, but with fur. I think it's important with fur to just get kind of in the zone. Kind of just go play with it for a while. Generally, the more time you spend, the nicer you can get it to look. The biggest issue really is the resistance, because people are taught to go quick and dirty with fur. I think a lot. And so you learn that, and then your brain is kind of resistant when you go in to try to spend more time with it. You're like, oh, but that's not how you do fur. How do you even? It really just mess around with it just like anything else. All right, that's looking pretty good on this side now. I want to hit this side a little bit harder. Technically, you could paint bacon, but we don't have any bacon-shaped miniatures, so you'd have to do it on canvas. I don't advise painting actual bacon. And the more you build up on top of the fur texture, the softer you can get it to look. Whereas the more brush strokes you leave showing, the coarser the fur will look, or the longer, depending on what you're doing. you can combine these like we did on Gnoll to get a soft look, but then with a few strands that are coming out and catching the light. So you get kind of both worlds. All right, let's do the front of this other arm, which is sadly neglected. I find with animals, it's just waiting till they're sleeping in a place with decent lighting if you're trying to take pictures of the fur. Unless you can catch them when they're tired and just like lying in the sun or the shade. I got some very cool photos of my Shilohs, my dogs, just focused on the fur around like their eyes, like this section of the head and the eye, because Shilohs have really cool eye markings and fur patterns. So I have pictures of all four. They're very different. So fur there, bringing that up along with everything else. Using the tiny brush with very thin paint to just bring up layers of it. And we do need to get this fur patch here. It hasn't had any attention to it. Yeah, they're not super expensive. Crinico. They might be, I don't know. I think mine shipped from Canada, but maybe you could find somebody out in the UK. Getting this fur painted in, hitting the edges again. Right along there. But I also want to get the top of this shoulder because there's a lot of light up here. Because it's hitting that arm, so it'd be hitting all that fur. Yeah, fur is just, it's like I get in my zen zone because it's just kind of work on it. Don't think about it. It's nice if you can put on a podcast or an audiobook or something while you're painting fur because it's just like kind of repetitive. You just have to pay attention to the direction of your brush stroke and just go. Just little bits of touches here where we're just trying to get a little bit of detail here. We don't want to bring it up too much. But using the smaller brush allows you to not have to unload as much. It gives you much better control over your paint. I mentioned this from time to time, but when I was learning to be a better painter, when I was practicing my first competition model, I switched to a triple O, and I painted almost everything with it. And what it made me do is focus on details, and it gave me the ability to control my paint better. And so then I was able to swap up to a bigger brush after that, after months of painting that way, and just have a better feel for the amount of paint I needed to get on the brush. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe. I'm not sure. I hope. Hopefully they will return and you will once again be able to buy awesome stuff. But yeah, so it can be an interesting tool to try to paint a lot with a smaller brush, just to make yourself focus. I'm gonna thin down my top highlight because it's got a lot of Osirian sand in it, which means it's got a lot of white in it. And we are almost done, so let's see here. What do I'll just do that shoulder. I think I'm gonna switch to my bigger brush. But yeah, tomorrow's Ogre Day. Ogre is another simple model that nonetheless, the cool thing about doing Gnoll, this Gnoll and that Ogre, are they're really meant to be kind of mooks, right? They're really not meant to be like main players or main characters or biggest villains. But you can paint them like they are. If you just spend a little extra time and create things that aren't there, like doing the stripy pants on Noli, on this Gnoll, and like spending a little extra time to really bring out details, maybe doing some freehand on the scarf to dress him up, he could become a main villain at that point, right? And like the Ogre, like just spending extra time and care and painting him could make him like the big bruiser at the end of your level, 1 to 2 or 3 campaign. So painting these simple guys, but taking the extra time to make them really cool can be a good exercise because it's simple, but there's room to make them really stand out. There we go. We got that shoulder reading a little lighter up here. Feel like I need just a bit more. Then I need to bring up this fur too. Like there's something to be said for taking a very simple model and then just doing it up to the 9s, right? Just to, because you have a lot of room there to just play then. Like, because it is simple and you're going to finish it pretty fast. So that gives you extra time to do extra work like stripy pants, tattoos, stuff that are cool, stuff that make for a cooler character. Alrighty. Think that'll do for now. We may come back, but at least we've got highlights. There's still more highlights to do probably, but we've got highlights. We've more or less equalized our paws. We got most of it back here. We didn't quite get to the tail. We didn't get to some of the higher areas over here. So there's still another day that we could work on the fur. But we'll swap. We'll do our pants. We're going to get this sash done next time, and then we'll work on the weaponry before we come back around. Maybe the fur will be part of the finishing at that point. Just finishing, bringing everything up to the same level at the end. But what we did today is we worked a lot on fur, and we talked a bit about OSL in there. We talked a bit about, let's see, there was a lot of little bits. Like, we talked a little bit about comic book style even back at the beginning. And light reflections, and we talked about basing proportions back at the start. Yeah, so tomorrow we are working on Ogre Dude. Yay, Ogre Dude of the really dramatic shadows. But we gotta get more highlights on him. More highlights tomorrow. This light is starting to look pretty good. It just needs some work. But yeah, we brought up the highlights on a lot of his front, and it's really helping bring out, like, just kind of like make the light work on him. So he's coming along really, really well. I really love this whole area, which since it's kind of the focal point, I'm very pleased with it. Very, very pleased with it. So yeah, I hope you guys had fun. And yeah, Rhonda at 2 p.m. Central. Rhonda! I have to light up when I say Rhonda now. That's the requirement per Shadow Raven. I hope you guys have a fantastic Monday, and yay, we're in another week. We will get through, and have a great one, everybody. We'll talk to you later, and bye-bye.